The Great Hall of the Galactic Confederation stretched out like a vast ocean of alien faces. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the center podium, her blue uniform crisp and clean against the swirling colors of thousands of different species. Above her head, holographic displays showed Earth in all its beauty. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds drifting peacefully across the surface. Sarah had practiced this speech for months. Every word was perfect. Every fact was checked 3 times. Earth's application for full membership in the Confederation was solid. Humans had proven themselves peaceful neighbors for 25 years since first contact. They had followed every rule, respected every boundary, and contributed to galactic science and culture. But as Sarah looked around the massive chamber, she felt something cold growing in her stomach. The alien faces staring back at her were not friendly. They were not even interested. Most looked bored. Some looked disgusted. The Vorthak delegation sat in the front row, their tall, elegant forms draped in expensive robes that shimmered with their own light. Their leader, Ambassador Kepler, watched Sarah with the same expression someone might use when looking at a bug. His pale blue skin seemed to glow with superiority, and his forearms were folded in a way that suggested he had already made up his mind. Behind the Vorthak sat the Xanathi, a species so advanced they claimed to think in mathematics. Their huge brains pulsed visibly through their transparent skulls, and their small mouths turned downward in permanent frowns. They had been the first to question whether humans were ready for membership. Sarah finished her presentation and waited. The voting began immediately, without discussion. Species after species cast their votes, and the numbers appeared on the main display in harsh red letters. Against, against, against. A few voted in favor, but not many. The final tally was brutal. 847 against, 3 in favor. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Ambassador Kepler rose slowly from his seat, all 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture that somehow managed to be both gracious and insulting at the same time. His voice carried easily through the chamber, smooth and cultured and completely without warmth. The Galactic Confederation has reviewed Earth's application for full membership, he began, his words echoing off the crystal walls. After careful consideration, we find humanity lacking. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists at her sides, but she kept her face calm. Around the chamber, alien delegates nodded in agreement or simply looked away, as if the matter was already forgotten. Your species shows concerning levels of violence, Kepler continued, his tone growing more condescending with each word. Your history is filled with wars, conflicts, and aggressive behavior. In just the past century of your development, you have fought 2 massive global wars and countless smaller ones. This is not the behavior of a civilized species. The Xanathi delegate stood next, her massive brain pulsing faster as she spoke. Furthermore, your technological development is primitive. You have barely mastered interstellar travel. Your understanding of quantum mechanics is elementary. Your social structures are chaotic and inefficient. You are quite simply not ready for membership in a civilized galactic community. Sarah's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways humans had grown and changed, all the contributions they had made to galactic society. But she knew it would not matter. The decision was already made before she had even entered the chamber. Kepler was not finished. The Confederation has decided to place humanity under protective oversight. You will be designated as a probationary species, with limited access to galactic resources and technology. Your ships will be restricted to designated travel lanes within your own small sector of space. Your colonies beyond the Sol system will be supervised, to ensure they develop properly. The word supervised sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She knew what that meant. It meant humans would be treated like children, watched and controlled by alien babysitters who thought they knew better. But Kepler was still talking, and his next words made Sarah's blood turn to ice. All human colonies outside your designated zone will be relocated to more appropriate areas. Your military vessels will be limited in number and capability. Trade with other species will be carefully monitored and controlled. These restrictions will remain in place until such time as humanity has proven itself worthy of reconsideration. And when will that be? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her chest. Kepler's smile was cold and sharp. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when you have learned to control your savage impulses and develop proper civilization. Until then, Remain in your little corner of space and try not to hurt yourselves." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not cruel laughter, but something worse. The kind of laughter adults make when a child asks if they can drive the family car. Dismissive, patronizing, completely without respect. Sarah stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of 847 different species looking down on her and her entire race. She thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had put their faith in this moment. She thought about the colonies that would be relocated and the freedoms that had just been stripped away with a simple vote. Finally she spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite its quiet tone. "The human delegation acknowledges the decision of the Confederation Council. We will comply with all restrictions and requirements as outlined. However, I want to make one thing perfectly clear." She paused, looking directly at Kethvar. "Humans have long memories. We do not forget when we are wronged, and we always eventually settle our debts." If Kethvar was troubled by her words, he showed no sign of it. He waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. Primitive threats from a primitive species, how expected. Sarah bowed formally, turned on her heel, and walked out of the great hall. Behind her, the alien delegates were already moving on to other business, the matter of humanity already forgotten. But as Sarah made her way back to her ship, she was thinking about that word Kethvar had used. Primitive. He was right in a way. Humans were primitive compared to these ancient species with their thousands of years of peace and prosperity. They were primitive in their technology, their politics, their understanding of the universe. But there was another kind of primitive that Kethvar and his kind had forgotten about. The primitive drive that had carried humans from caves to spaceships in just a few thousand years. The primitive stubbornness that refused to accept defeat even when defeat seemed certain. The primitive anger that burned cold and patient until the right moment came to strike back. As her ship lifted off from the Confederation's capital world, Sarah looked back at the glittering city below and made a promise. Humanity had been humiliated today. They had been dismissed and restricted and treated like dangerous children. But that would not be the end of the story. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, however long it took, humanity would be back. And when they returned, they would make sure the galaxy remembered exactly why it was dangerous to underestimate a primitive species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of the food chain. The voyage back to Earth took 3 weeks. Sarah spent every day of that journey planning. 25 years had passed since the humiliation at the Confederation Council, and the galaxy had largely forgotten about humanity. The major species went about their business, secure in their ancient peace and superior technology. They assumed the humans were sulking in their corner of space, perhaps slowly learning to be more civilized under Confederation oversight. They could not have been more wrong. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the center of the most secret facility on Earth, surrounded by technology that would have made the Confederation's finest scientists weep with envy. The underground complex stretched for miles beneath the mountains of Colorado, hidden from alien surveillance satellites by layers of quantum shielding that humanity had developed from stolen Vorthak designs. But calling it stolen was not quite accurate. The technology had been acquired through careful trading with species the Confederation considered undesirable. The warrior clans of Krylia, the nomadic Void Runners, and dozens of other groups that lived on the edges of galactic society. These species had no love for the Confederation's arrogant rule, and they were more than happy to trade with humans who treated them as equals rather than inferiors. "Show me the latest test results," Marcus said to his assistant, Dr. Lin Zhao. She was one of hundreds of Earth's brightest minds, who had been quietly recruited for this project. Over the past 2 decades, Lin activated a holographic display that showed a sleek ship moving through space at impossible speeds. "The new quantum-fold drive is performing beyond all expectations. We're achieving transit times that are 300% faster than standard Confederation drives, and the power consumption is actually lower." Marcus nodded, but he was not surprised. This was the pattern they had discovered again and again over the years. Human technology was not just different from alien designs, it was better. Not because humans were smarter than species like the Xanathi, but because they thought differently. The aliens had spent thousands of years perfecting their technology within the safe boundaries of established science. They made small, careful improvements to designs that were already ancient, when human civilization was still learning to make fire. But humans had no such limitations. They approached every problem as if it had never been solved before, bringing fresh perspectives that had been forgotten everywhere else in the galaxy. "What about the weapons systems?" Marcus asked. Lynn's expression grew more serious. "That's where we're really making progress. The aliens design their weapons for ceremonial combat between honorable opponents. Their ships fire in predictable patterns, following rules of engagement that haven't changed in centuries. But our weapons—" She paused, bringing up another display. "Our weapons are designed by a species that learned warfare in the trenches and perfected it in 100 different conflicts." The holographic display showed human warships engaging Confederation vessels in simulated combat. The results were not even close. Human ships moved in coordinated pack formations, their weapons targeting not just enemy vessels but communications arrays, sensor networks, and command structures. While alien ships fought with honor and ceremony, human ships fought to win. Marcus walked through the facility, past laboratories where scientists worked on projects that would revolutionize galactic warfare. In one room, engineers were developing new armor that could absorb and redistribute energy weapon impacts. In another, programmers were creating artificial intelligence systems that could coordinate fleet movements faster than any organic mind could follow. But the most important work was not happening in the laboratories. It was happening in the diplomatic quarters, where former Commander Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen, was meeting with representatives from across the galaxy. The Krillian war chief Thax stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scaled hide scarred from 100 battles. His people had been warriors for millennia, but the Confederation had forced them to abandon their traditional ways in favor of civilized behavior. They had not forgotten the humiliation, and they were eager to work with humans who understood the value of strength. "Your ships are impressive," Thax growled in his deep voice. "But can your people fight when the shooting starts? War is not just about technology." Admiral Chen smiled coldly. "Chief Thax, my people have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We fought with sticks and stones, then bronze and iron, then gunpowder and nuclear weapons. We've had world wars that killed millions, and we've had small conflicts in every corner of our planet. The Confederation thinks this makes us primitive, but it actually makes us something much more dangerous. It makes us experienced." The Void Runner, Captain Zara 9, spoke up from her position near the wall. Her people were nomads who lived their entire lives in space, never settling on planets. They knew the hidden routes between star systems better than anyone, and they had been watching Confederation movements for decades without being detected. "The Confederation has grown lazy," she said in her musical voice. "They have not fought a real war in 3,000 years. Their ships are beautiful, but they are not built for actual combat. Their crews are well trained in peacetime maneuvers, but they have never faced an enemy that wants to kill them." Admiral Chen nodded. "That's exactly what we're counting on. The Confederation has forgotten what real warfare looks like. They're about to get a reminder." Over the following months, the Hidden Alliance grew stronger. Krillian shipyards began producing vessels designed to human specifications. Void Runner scouts mapped out secret routes that would allow human fleets to move undetected through Confederation space. Other species provided intelligence, resources, and safe harbors, but perhaps most importantly, they provided legitimacy. When humans finally made their move, it would not be as a single primitive species attacking their betters. It would be as the leaders of a coalition of oppressed peoples who had finally decided to demand respect. The human fleet that was taking shape in hidden bases throughout their sector of space looked nothing like the elegant vessels preferred by the Confederation. These were brutal utilitarian war machines built by engineers who had learned their craft in the most violent wars in galactic history. They were covered in armor plating that could absorb massive amounts of damage. Their weapons were designed not for honorable dueling, but for devastating first strikes that would cripple enemy fleets before they could respond. Most importantly, they were crewed by humans who had grown up hearing stories of the humiliation their species had suffered. Every officer and enlisted person on those ships understood that they were not just fighting for victory, they were fighting for respect, for dignity, for the right to be treated as equals in a galaxy that had dismissed them as inferior. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable, and looked out at the fleet assembling around her. 200 ships, each one a masterpiece of human engineering and determination. Behind them, in hidden bases throughout human space, thousands more vessels were under construction, but numbers alone would not win this war. The Confederation had fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands, with technology that had been refined over millennia. What humans had was something more valuable than superior numbers or even superior technology. They had something to prove. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving a priority message from Earth Command." Sarah took the message and read it silently. It was simple, direct, and exactly what she had been waiting to hear for 25 years. The Vorthak had finally made the mistake that would give humanity the excuse it needed to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. "All ships," Admiral Chen announced over the fleet communication system, "prepare for quantum fold jump. It's time to settle the score." The mining colony on Kepler 442b had been humanity's pride for 15 years. Located on the edge of human-controlled space, it represented everything humans could accomplish when they worked together. The colonists had turned a barren rock into a thriving community of 50,000 people, complete with schools, hospitals, and research facilities that pushed the boundaries of human science. Captain Maria Santos had been born on Kepler 442b, and she loved everything about her home world. The way the twin suns painted the sky in brilliant orange every morning, the massive crystal formations that grew naturally in the planet's unique soil, the sense of community that came from building something beautiful in the empty darkness of space. That was before the Vorthak ships arrived. Maria was working in the Geological Survey office when the first reports came in. Massive vessels dropping out of quantum fold space, their elegant curves gleaming like jewels against the starfield. At first, the colonists thought it might be a diplomatic visit. The Vorthak rarely traveled to human space, but perhaps they were finally ready to discuss trade, agreements, or scientific cooperation. The illusion lasted exactly 3 minutes. The Vorthak fleet commander's message was broadcast across every communication channel on the planet. Ambassador Kethavar himself appeared on the screens, looking exactly as arrogant and superior as he had 25 years earlier, when he had humiliated humanity before the Confederation Council. "Attention, primitive inhabitants of this world," he began, his forearm spread in a gesture of false benevolence. "The Vorthak Consortium has identified significant quantum crystal deposits in this system. These resources are too valuable to be wasted by a species lacking the proper technology and wisdom to utilize them effectively." Maria felt her blood turn cold as she listened to the announcement. Around her, other colonists gathered around communication screens, their faces reflecting the same growing horror. "By the authority granted to the Vorthak Consortium by the Galactic Confederation," Kethavar continued, "we are hereby claiming this system and all its resources. The current inhabitants will be relocated to more appropriate facilities, where they can be properly supervised and educated." The word "relocated" hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the room knew what it really meant. 50,000 human beings were about to be forced from their homes and shipped off to some Confederation world where they would be treated like primitive refugees. But Kethavar was not finished with his humiliation. "We understand this may come as a shock to your limited comprehension," he said, his tone growing more condescending with every word. "But you must understand that advanced species have responsibilities to manage galactic resources efficiently. Your people have been mining these crystals with crude, wasteful methods, under proper Vorthak supervision. This system will be able to produce 10 times the current output." The communication screens showed Vorthak landing ships descending toward the colony's main population centers. But these were not diplomatic vessels. They were troop transports bristling with weapons and energy shields. Maria ran from the survey office toward her home, hoping to reach her family before the aliens arrived. Around her, the colony was erupting into chaos as people tried to understand what was happening to their world. Some were packing their belongings. Others were trying to contact Earth for help. A few were talking about resistance, but everyone knew it was hopeless. The colonists had mining equipment and civilian vehicles. The Vorthak had weapons that could level cities. By the time Maria reached her family's housing complex, Vorthak soldiers were already moving through the streets. They were tall, elegant beings, their pale blue skin gleaming in the sunlight. Their weapons were works of art. but they were no less deadly for being beautiful. Maria found her parents and younger brother huddled in their living room, watching news feeds from across the colony. The reports were all the same. Vorthak forces were taking control of major facilities without resistance. The colonial government had already surrendered, hoping to avoid bloodshed. "What do we do?" her brother asked, his voice shaky with fear. Before Maria could answer, the door chimed. A Vorthak soldier stood outside, his weapon held casually but ready. Behind him, Maria could see other soldiers herding colonists toward transport vehicles. "You will gather essential personal belongings only," the soldier said in perfect English, his tone polite but firm. "Report to Processing Center 7 within 1 hour. Compliance will ensure your safety during relocation." Maria wanted to argue, to demand some kind of explanation or justification, but she could see in the soldier's eyes the same expression she had seen in Kethvar's face all those years ago. Complete indifference. To this alien, humans were not people with rights and feelings. They were simply obstacles to be moved out of the way. The processing centers were exactly what Maria had feared. Thousands of colonists were packed into temporary facilities, waiting to be loaded onto transport ships. Families were separated. Personal belongings were confiscated if they were deemed unnecessary by Vorthak officials. The elderly and sick were given minimal medical attention, but perhaps worst of all was the attitude of their captors. The Vorthak soldiers and officials were not cruel or sadistic. They were simply doing their jobs, following procedures that had been developed by a civilization that viewed humans as barely intelligent animals. They showed the same level of concern they might have for livestock being moved to a new pasture. News of the occupation reached Earth within hours, but the response was exactly what everyone expected. The Confederation Council refused to even meet to discuss the situation. When Earth's government filed a formal protest, they received a brief, dismissive reply from Ambassador Kethvar himself. "The Vorthak Consortium is operating within established Confederation law regarding resource management in primitive sectors. The inhabitants of the disputed system are being relocated for their own safety and education. This matter is not subject to review or appeal." The message included one final line that made Maria's hands shake when she read it on her portable communication device. "Primitive species do not own what they cannot defend. Be grateful we allow you to exist." But something else was happening in the background, something the Vorthak had not expected. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy about human ships moving through space in unprecedented numbers. These were not the small civilian vessels the aliens were used to seeing. These were military ships built to designs no one had ever seen before. More importantly, humans were not alone. Krillian war fleets were emerging from hiding places throughout the galaxy. Void runner ships were appearing in systems where they had never been detected before. Dozens of other species that the Confederation had dismissed or ignored were suddenly showing themselves as allies of humanity. Maria was in Processing Center 7 when the first human warship dropped out of quantum fold space above Kepler 442b. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a brutal, angular vessel that looked like it had been designed by people who understood that space combat was not a game or a ceremony, but a matter of life and death. The Vorthak orbital stations immediately went to alert status, their beautiful curved hulls bristling with defensive weapons. But they had not expected what happened next. Instead of demanding surrender or engaging in negotiations, the human ship opened fire immediately. Its weapons were not the elegant energy beams preferred by Confederation species. They were focused plasma cannons that punched through Vorthak shields like they were made of paper. The first orbital platform exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The second managed to return fire, but its shots were absorbed by the human ship's angular armor plating. Within minutes, all 6 Vorthak orbital defenses had been reduced to glowing wreckage. Ambassador Kethvar's voice crackled over the communication system, no longer smooth and condescending but sharp with panic. "This is an unprovoked attack on Confederation forces. We demand immediate withdrawal and reparations for—" His transmission was cut off as the human ship's targeting systems locked onto the Vorthak command vessel. The elegant diplomatic cruiser, with its sweeping curves and artistic hull decorations, simply disintegrated under the focused fire of weapons designed by a species that had learned warfare in the most violent conflicts in galactic history. Maria and the other colonists watched from the processing center as more human ships arrived. These vessels moved in coordinated formations that spoke of decades of careful planning and preparation. They were not just rescuing the colonists, they were making a statement. The last thing Maria saw before the Vorthak guards abandoned their posts was a message broadcast on every communication frequency in the system. It was Admiral Sarah Chen, the same woman who had been humiliated before the Confederation Council 25 years earlier. But she looked different now, harder, more confident, and completely without mercy. "This is Admiral Chen of the Human Defense Fleet," the message began. "We are here to collect what belongs to us. The Galactic Confederation taught us that primitive species do not own what they cannot defend. Today, we demonstrate that humanity has learned this lesson very well." The screen showed the Admiral standing on the bridge of her ship, with the burning wreckage of the Vorthak fleet visible through the windows behind her. Consider this our forma. The Vorthak High Command received the first reports with disbelief. A human fleet had attacked their mining operation at Kepler 442b, destroying 6 orbital platforms and a diplomatic cruiser. It seemed impossible. Humans were primitive, restricted to their small sector of space, barely capable of building ships that could cross interstellar distances. Fleet Commander Zethkol read the reports again, his forearms trembling with rage. The humans had not just attacked Vorthak forces, they had humiliated them. The elegant vessels that had taken centuries to design and build had been destroyed by crude human warships in a matter of minutes. "Send the 2nd and 5th battle groups to human space," he ordered his subordinates. "These primitives need to be reminded of their place in the galactic order." But as the Vorthak fleets prepared to launch their response, something unprecedented happened. Human warships began dropping out of quantum-fold space throughout Vorthak territory, not at one system, but at 7 major worlds simultaneously. The attack on Kepler 442b had not been a rescue mission. It had been the opening move in a campaign that the humans had been planning for decades. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable, as it emerged from quantum-fold space above the Vorthak homeworld of Vorthtar. Around her, the fleet that had taken 25 years to build deployed into battle formation. 200 human warships, supported by Krillian battlecruisers and Void Runner stealth vessels. But what made the sight truly terrifying was not the number of ships, but how they moved. The Confederation species had grown used to combat that followed ancient rules of honor and ceremony. Fleets would meet in open space, exchange formal challenges, and engage in carefully choreographed battles that minimize casualties and collateral damage. The human fleet moved like a pack of wolves. Ships broke off in coordinated groups, each one targeting a different aspect of the Vorthak defense network. While some vessels engaged the elegant Vorthak warships in direct combat, others targeted communication satellites, sensor arrays, and supply depots. The humans were not fighting for honor or glory. They were fighting to completely destroy their enemy's ability to wage war. Fleet Commander Zethkol watched from his command ship as his carefully planned defenses crumbled in the face of tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Human ships did not engage in single combat with worthy opponents. They swarmed individual targets, concentrating overwhelming firepower on one vessel at a time until it was destroyed. Then moving on to the next target. "They fight like animals," he whispered to his tactical officer, but that was exactly the point. Humans had evolved as persistence predators, creatures that hunted in coordinated packs until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. They had brought those same instincts to space combat, creating a form of warfare that the galaxy had not seen in millennia. The battle for Vorthtar lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Vorthak home fleet had been completely destroyed, their orbital defense stations reduced to debris, and their planetary communication grid in ruins. Not a single human ship had been lost. Similar scenes were playing out across 6 other Vorthak worlds. At each location, human fleets supported by their alien allies were demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication and ruthless efficiency that shocked the galaxy. These were not the primitive barbarians the Confederation had dismissed decades earlier. These were apex predators who had learned to hunt among the stars. The Confederation Council met in emergency session as reports flooded in from across Vorthak space. The images were difficult to believe. Elegant Vorthak vessels, symbols of advanced civilization for thousands of years, reduced to burning wreckage by crude human warships. But perhaps more disturbing than the military defeats was what the humans did next. Instead of occupying the conquered worlds or demanding tribute, Admiral Chen broadcast a message that would change galactic politics forever. Her image appeared on every communication network in Confederation space, transmitted from the bridge of her flagship as the burning remains of the Vorthak home fleet drifted past the windows behind her. 50 years ago, she began, her voice calm and steady despite the destruction surrounding her. Ambassador Kethavar told the human delegation that primitive species do not own what they cannot defend. Today, we have demonstrated that humanity has taken this lesson to heart, she paused, allowing the galaxy to see the wreckage of what had been the Confederation's most powerful member species just hours earlier. The Galactic Confederation rejected humanity's application for membership because we were too violent, too primitive, too dangerous to be trusted with advanced technology. You are correct on all counts. We are violent, but only when provoked. We are primitive, but primitive instincts can be remarkably effective against opponents who have forgotten how to fight. And we are dangerous, especially to those who mistake our patience for weakness. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched as this human admiral, representing a species they had dismissed as insignificant, delivered terms to the most advanced civilization in known space. The Vorthak Consortium will immediately withdraw from all human territories and return all displaced colonists to their homes. Admiral Chen continued. They will pay reparations for damages caused during their illegal occupation, and they will formally apologize to the human government for their unprovoked aggression. The demands were shocking, not because they were unreasonable, but because they were being made by humans. For thousands of years, the Confederation species had been the ones dictating terms to younger, weaker civilizations. The idea that primitives could defeat advanced species and demand concessions was almost incomprehensible, but Admiral Chen was not finished. To the Galactic Confederation Council, we offer this demonstration as proof that humanity has evolved beyond your expectations. We are no longer asking for your permission to exist as equals in this galaxy. We are informing you that we have claimed that equality through strength. The image switched to show human fleets stationed above each of the conquered Vorthak worlds, their weapons trained on the planets below. The message was clear. Humanity now held the lives of billions of Vorthak civilians in their hands. We have no desire for conquest or empire, Admiral Chen said, her image returning to the screen. We seek only the respect and recognition that should have been granted to us decades ago, but we will no longer be ignored, dismissed, or treated as inferiors by species who have forgotten that peace is maintained by strength, not arrogance. The final part of her message sent shockwaves through every government in Confederation space. Effective immediately, humanity is withdrawing from all Confederation oversight and restrictions. We will govern ourselves according to our own laws and values. We will trade with whomever we choose, explore whatever regions of space interest us, and defend our interests with whatever force is necessary. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes seeming to look directly at every viewer across the galaxy. Any species or government that wishes to treat with humanity as equals will find us ready partners for trade, exploration, and mutual defense. Any species that continues to view us as primitive inferiors will discover exactly how dangerous primitives can be when they decide they have had enough of being underestimated. The transmission ended with an image that would haunt the dreams of Confederation. Leaders for years to come, hundreds of human warships in perfect formation, their brutal, angular hulls scarred by battle but unbroken, floating above the conquered capital of what had been the galaxy's most powerful species just hours before. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, human fleets began withdrawing from Vorthak space. They had made their point. The galaxy now understood that humanity was no longer asking for permission to be treated as equals. They had taken their place at the galactic table by force, and anyone who wanted to challenge that decision was welcome to try. But as Admiral Chen watched the tactical displays showing Confederation fleets mobilizing across the galaxy, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Defeating the Vorthak had been a demonstration of human capability. What came next would determine whether that demonstration had been enough to earn humanity the respect it demanded, or whether the galaxy would require more convincing. Either way, humanity was ready. They had spent 50 years preparing for this moment, and they had learned the most important lesson in galactic politics. Respect is not given freely to those who ask politely. It is earned by those who prove they cannot be safely ignored. The emergency session of the Galactic Confederation Council was unlike anything in the organization's 3,000-year history. The great chamber that had once been filled with the confident voices of advanced civilizations now hummed with fear and uncertainty. Representative after representative took the podium to demand action against humanity's unprecedented aggression. The Xanathi delegate, her massive brain pulsing rapidly with agitation, called for immediate military intervention. These primitives have violated every principle of civilized conduct. They must be crushed before their barbarism spreads to other species. But as the debate continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy about species that had been silent for centuries, suddenly revealing themselves as human allies. The Krillian war clans, supposedly reduced to small tribal groups on isolated worlds, had emerged with massive fleets that dwarfed anything the Confederation had on record. The nomadic Void Runners, thought to be a minor nuisance on the galactic rim, had demonstrated the ability to move undetected through Confederation space at will. Most shocking of all, dozens of species that the Confederation had dismissed as developing or unworthy were declaring their independence and forming mutual defense pacts with humanity. The comfortable order that had maintained galactic peace for millennia was crumbling before their eyes. Ambassador Kepler sat in his ornate chair, his forearms wrapped around himself as if he were cold. The same being who had dismissed humanity as primitive barbarians 50 years earlier now looked like a broken shell of his former self. His elegant homeworld lay in ruins, his fleet was destroyed, and his people were dependent on human mercy for their survival. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its former arrogance. Perhaps we acted hastily in our treatment of the human species. The admission sent ripples of shock through the chamber. Kepler had been one of the strongest voices against human membership, and his support had influenced hundreds of other species to vote against humanity's application. But the damage was already done. As the Council debated their response to the human uprising, more disturbing news arrived. Human diplomatic ships were arriving at systems throughout the galaxy, offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts to any species interested in joining what they called the Free Species Alliance. The terms were simple and attractive: equal representation regardless of technological level, open trade without Confederation restrictions, and protection from aggressive neighbors. For species that had spent centuries being condescended to by the established powers, it was an irresistible offer. Admiral Chen received the Confederation's response while her fleet was stationed in neutral space near the galactic core. The message was delivered by a Xanathi diplomat who had been chosen for his reputation as a skilled negotiator. The Galactic Confederation recognizes that errors may have been made in our previous interactions with humanity, the diplomat began, his words carefully chosen to avoid admitting actual wrongdoing. We are prepared to discuss revisions to humanity's status within the existing framework of galactic governance. Sarah read the message twice before responding, her expression showing none of the satisfaction she felt at finally hearing these proud species ask for negotiations. Inform the Confederation Council that humanity appreciates their willingness to discuss our concerns, she replied. However, we are no longer interested in joining their organization. We are creating something better. The negotiations that followed took place on a neutral station in the Deneb system, chosen because it was one of the few locations in the galaxy that no major power claimed as territory. The human delegation was led by Admiral Chen, but she was joined by representatives from over 100 species that had pledged to join the new alliance. Across the negotiating table sat the cream of Confederation diplomacy, beings who had spent their entire lives managing the complex politics of a galaxy-spanning civilization. They had come expecting to negotiate with primitive humans who would be grateful for any concessions offered to them. Instead, they found themselves facing a coalition that represented nearly half the galaxy's populated systems, led by humans who had spent 50 years learning exactly how galactic politics really worked. The Free Species Alliance is not seeking to destroy the Confederation, Admiral Chen explained as the talks began. We simply believe that galactic civilization has grown stagnant under your leadership. For 3,000 years you have maintained peace by excluding anyone who might challenge your comfortable assumptions. That approach has created a galaxy where innovation is discouraged, exploration is limited, and entire species are dismissed as unworthy simply because they think differently than you do. The Xanathi lead negotiator's brain pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as confusion. But our system has maintained stability for millennia. Why would you want to change something that works? Because it doesn't work, Sarah replied firmly. It only works for species like yours that were lucky enough to be included from the beginning. For everyone else, the species you consider developing, the ones you call unworthy, the civilizations you dismiss as too violent or too primitive. Your system has been 3,000 years of oppression justified by claims of moral superiority. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy, divided into two distinct regions. Your confederation controls perhaps 40% of inhabited systems, but you represent less than 20% of the galaxy's sentient population. The rest have been waiting for someone to offer them an alternative to your benevolent tyranny. The negotiations continued for weeks, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Confederation could not offer anything that would convince humanity to abandon the coalition they had spent decades building. They had already proven they could defeat the strongest Confederation military forces, and they had the support of species across the galaxy who were tired of being treated as second-class citizens. In the end, the document that emerged from the talks was not a treaty between equals, but a new constitution for galactic civilization. The Confederation would continue to exist, but only as one power block among several in a much more diverse and competitive galaxy. The signing ceremony took place on Earth, in the same building where the United Nations had once met to discuss humanity's own political evolution. Representatives from over 300 species gathered to witness the birth of a new galactic order based on merit and mutual respect, rather than ancient privilege and technological superiority. Admiral Chen stood at the podium, where she had once been humiliated and dismissed as the representative of a primitive species. Now she was being sworn in as the first elected leader of the Free Species Alliance, chosen not because of her species' technological advantages or ancient wisdom, but because she had proven herself capable of building something better than what had come before. 50 years ago, she said, as billions of beings across the galaxy watched the ceremony, humanity was told we were too primitive to join galactic civilization. Today we have proven that sometimes primitives can teach advanced species something new. That strength comes not from excluding those who are different, but from embracing the diversity of thought and experience that makes us all stronger. The galaxy that emerged from the Constitutional Convention was messier and more chaotic than the orderly confederation that had preceded it. There were more conflicts, more disagreements, more competing interests to balance, but there was also more innovation, more exploration, and more opportunities for species to rise according to their abilities rather than their ancient pedigree. And at the center of it all were the humans, the species, that had been dismissed as too primitive to matter, but had proven that evolution never stops, and that underestimating the capacity for growth is a mistake that even advanced civilizations make only once. Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of her flagship, looking out at the fleet of human and alien vessels that now patrolled the trade routes of the new galactic order. They were not the most elegant ships in space, nor were they crewed by the most ancient or wise species in the galaxy. But they were free, and they had earned their freedom the way humanity had always earned everything worth having, through determination, intelligence, and the absolute refusal to accept that they were not good enough to stand as equals with anyone in the universe. The galaxy had trembled in terror when humanity finally settled the score. But what it discovered in the aftermath was something far more valuable than fear. It discovered hope for a future where no species would ever again be told they were too primitive to matter.